This is a continuation of a trend we have seen developing over the last couple of months, which is that Ukraine has developed the technology to use drones at strategic distance. That was once thought to be entirely the province of cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, and those were in short supply for Ukraine. The Americans hesitated before providing Tomahawks, and we know about the Germans. So all of this puts Ukraine at a strategic disadvantage. Now that has been overcome. The Russians are now facing near daily attacks, not on civilian targets, but on oil infrastructure, refineries, and other military targets. This is a very big deal. That, combined with the stalemate on the ground, the rising Russian casualties per kilometer gained, and the loss in some cases, not very big losses, but some losses of Russian controlled territory in Ukraine, mean that Russia is beginning to lose the war. I'm not suggesting Ukraine will drive Russia out of Ukraine or liberate the entire country, but Russia is no longer, not only is it no longer winning, it is beginning to lose. Moreover, that realization is sinking in European capitals and even to some degree, I'm happy to say, in Washington, D.C.
How do you think it does change Washington's stance position? Or do you see a recent shift in U.S. position?
Well, U.S. position covers a lot of ground. So let's unpack this. Ever since the Biden administration, until now, most of the U.S. analytic community, the intelligence community, most experts expected that Ukraine would fight very bravely and lose very quickly. This was the expectation in 2022. The Biden administration had it. They were wrong. Then, when Ukraine did not collapse quickly, when the Russians failed in various attempts to win the war immediately, to seize Kyiv or decapitate the leadership, the next consensus in Washington, or the majority opinion in Washington, was that Ukraine would fight very bravely and slowly lose. The New York Times, serious publication, ran article after article suggesting that Ukraine was gradually and inevitably losing the war. Many of us doubted this scenario from the first. And now those Americans who believed that Ukraine actually had the capacity to withstand the Russians and that Russia was not going to succeed in its war of aggression that view, once a marginal view, is now becoming the predominant view. Now, this does not mean that Ukraine will inevitably win. Inevitable is something I don't believe in. But it does mean that at the moment, the fortunes of war have turned against Russia. And as long as Ukraine keeps fighting the way it has, with skill and tenacity, and if the West can find ways to continue supporting Ukraine, things look pretty dark for Russia. Now, there's a third level to this, which is the Trump administration, Trump himself, certainly believed that Ukraine would lose. This is what he told President Zelensky on February 28th, 2025. You don't have any cards, right? Everybody remembers that. I was watching it live. It's now becoming clearer that Ukraine, in fact, has a lot of cards. Trump loves winners. Ukraine is winning. Putin is beginning to look like a loser. I don't mean to suggest it's all over. I don't believe in inevitability. But the Trump administration is, or I should say, even the Trump administration is recalibrating its views. And those in the Trump administration who thought Ukraine was a loser, right? Not worth supporting. They're corrupt. They're bad. Uh, this nonsense that you heard from people close to the Trump administration and even a few in the Trump administration has now been challenged. And those in the Trump administration who actually understand the stakes and have been more supportive of Ukraine, those people in the Trump administration are beginning to get more grip on the policy. So sorry to go on at length, but I wanted to unpack this for you.
This is perfect. Now, what do you think has happened at G7 meeting? What has changed there? There was a joint statement. A big portion of it was dedicated to Ukraine, that we're standing by Ukraine. We're going to enforce its air defense, long-range weapons. How would you comment on this joint statement, on the notion?
It was a pretty good joint statement. It wasn't definitive in all ways. It said that the G7 will consider making arrangements for Ukraine to produce certain kinds of weapons. It didn't say that it's absolutely going to do it. So it was not as strong a statement as some have suggested. But it was a pretty good statement anyway. And the fact that the US signed on to it is a very good sign. The Europeans have shown remarkable and laudable consistency in backing Ukraine. And this is you could see this, the British, German, French, Italians, Canadians all pushed for a very good statement. And Ukraine has other friends, Poland, the Finns, the Swedes, the Baltic countries. These are all people who back Ukraine because they think Ukraine is right and because they realize that their interests are much better served if Ukraine is successful. So you see this staunch European defense of Ukraine, and now Trump, because of the change of fortunes of war, has gone on with it. I also think that Trump may have been influenced by the Europeans supporting the MOU that has brought a kind of a ceasefire to the Iran war.
So what is your comment on that? Like exchanging aid, like aid for Ukraine in exchange of help with Strait of Hormuz. Did you think it's going to work? I mean,
well, I don't like the U.S. making assistance to Ukraine conditional on European assistance in the Strait of Hormuz. Aid to Ukraine and Ukraine's success is in the American interest, full stop. Ukraine's success helps the U.S. both in Europe and around the world. Full stop, right? But if it takes some European offer to be helpful in the Strait of Hormuz, to get Trump to see that, to get Trump to support Ukraine, well, I'd go along with it. For the sake of support for Ukraine, there's not a lot I wouldn't do. So I think the Europeans saw it that way. And after all, the British and French have organized a coalition of the willing to help with reopening the strait once there's a ceasefire. So I'm sure that the British and French made clear to Trump that they're willing to do their part. Politics and foreign policy are not for the purist. So yeah, in the Europeans' place, I would have done that. And frankly, there are good people in the Trump administration who want to see Ukraine succeed. And they were, I think, able to work with the Europeans to come up with a pretty good statement at the G7.
So do you see this as a solid shift, favorable of Ukraine? Do you see it can transfer to help with somehow peace talks as well?
Well, solid shift. This is the Trump administration we're talking about, and it is notoriously mercurial. With respect to peace talks, the problem with peace talks is that Putin has so far shown absolutely no interest in them. The problem is not a lack of channels. The problem is Putin wants total victory, and he thinks he can get it. Now, From Putin's perspective, he may see that this is based on reality. The US could fail in its support of Ukraine. AfD, the hard right German party, could come to power. Maybe the French right will come to power and not back Ukraine, though I think they may end up more like Meloni with respect to Ukraine, and I hope that's the case if they do come to power. The fact is, the Europeans have been staunch. The Americans are in a better place, and that may convince Putin to change his views. The Russians know how not to negotiate, but they also know how to negotiate when they have to. And they can go from not negotiating to negotiating very quickly. They're skilled at it. They could do a deal. And the deal on the table is pretty clear. It would be a ceasefire in place plus security arrangements for Ukraine. That would leave Russia in physical possession of some 18-19% of Ukraine. It's important that the West never recognize this. Never. But it is also possible that Ukraine could become the kind of West Germany of the 21st century. The West Germans never recognized Soviet-occupied East Germany. They never did. But they did say that they would achieve the reunification of Germany through diplomatic and peaceful means. Now, at the time, this was seen as a permanent compromise. It turned out to be a very smart move by the Germans. And you see where I'm headed with this. The deal on the table, well, it's been talked about, let's say, would leave most of Ukraine free. And it could be secure if the Europeans came through and the Americans came through with the arrangements to provide backing for Ukraine. Now, in this case, I have little doubt, I have utter confidence that Ukraine's economy would recover and recover very quickly. You would see a Ukrainian miracle similar to the West German miracle in the 1950s after the destruction of World War II, and sort of a Ukrainian version of what Poland went through starting in the mid and late 1990s, which was a successful systemic transformation, where they got rid of communist and early post-communist corruption and built a modern European state very successfully. If the Poles did it, the Ukrainians can do it. And this would be a strategic disaster for Putin. It'd actually be pretty good for Russia, because Russians, if they saw the Ukrainians creating a modern European country, might actually decide that they could do better for themselves by not following the Putin-Stalinist model of repression and power. But that's another issue. We can debate Russia's future.
And my last question. Pentagon said that it's going to review its posture in European countries, European allies. Your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are it's a very good thing to push the Europeans to build up their militaries and contribute more to NATO's Article 5 defense of Europe. This is a good thing. And I don't mind the Trump administration pushing. However, I do think it is foolish to the point of blindness to withdraw U.S. forces in the face of Russian aggression against Europe. That aggression is taking place, okay? Sabotage, assassinations, drone overflights. What are we doing? To push the Europeans to do more is a good thing. But frankly, the Europeans are doing more. The Poles, Finns, Swedes, Baltic states, Romania have been doing it for a while. The Germans have now joined them. They are building up their military because of the Russian threat. The British aren't doing enough, and they're having a big political battle over it, and the French could be doing more. But the fact is, the US is winning this argument with Europe about Europeans doing more. To start pulling out US forces or acting in an uncoordinated, unilateral fashion in the face of an actual Russian threat does nothing for common security. It's as if it's 1995 and we can pull forces out of Europe without consequence. It's not 1995. It's 2026, and Russia is threatening. Okay? They may be tempted by all of this talk of US withdrawal or this disparagement of NATO. They might be tempted to try something in the Baltics. I don't think they will, but it doesn't matter what I think. For the US to suggest that it is not behind Article 5 in order to put pressure on the Europeans is an invitation to a catastrophe. And I think the US would be better advised to find a way to close the deal with the Europeans on greater European defense spending. And by the way, working with Ukraine, right? Ukraine's development of drones is now famously world-class. The Ukrainian army is serious. Ukraine can be a net contributor to European security. So let's figure out a way to do this. Instead of the United States bashing the Europeans, the West Europeans in particular, and threatening to leave them open to the Russians to prove some damn point, when it would be far better to simply take the win. The win meaning that the Europeans, particularly the Germans, have acknowledged that they need to do more on defense. So land the win, right? Land the deal.